A werewolf shifter romance audiobook. They told me omegas were born to kneel. They were wrong. I'm Alara, the weakest wolf in the whispering wilds, and this is how I made the strongest alpha beg. Chapter 1. The Summoning Shadow. The horn's cry wasn't a summons, it was a sentence. I was already awake when it tore through the mist, because sleep had abandoned me the moment the moon slipped behind the clouds. My tiny hut felt smaller than ever, the reed walls pressing in, the runes carved above my door pulsing cold against my collarbones like a warning I'd ignored too many times. I rose anyway, pulled the frayed cloak around my shoulders, stepped barefoot onto the frost-dusted earth. Outside, the whispering wilds were holding their breath. Fog curled between the pines like ghosts too afraid to speak. Every hut I passed stayed dark, shutters sealed. No one walks beside an omega on her way to judgment. That's the rule. That's always been the rule. Their whispers still found me. She actually did it this time. Feeding pups from the council's share? She's begging to be broken. Let the alpha finish it fast. I kept my chin high and my eyes forward. They wanted my gaze on the ground. They would never have it. The path climbed. Thorns clawed at my cloak, snagging the places my mother had mended with trembling fingers before the shame swallowed her whole. The higher I went, the brighter the runes burned against my skin, old magic designed to remind me I was born to bow. I didn't bow. The world tree's roots parted like a wound, and there it was. The alpha's den. A cavern mouth framed by glowing sigils that hurt to look at directly. Two enforcers stood guard, arms folded, scars gleaming. They didn't speak, they simply moved aside, and the weight of their silence pushed me forward. Inside, the air changed, warmer, thicker, cedar smoke and storm, and something that made my stomach twist in ways I refused to name. He was waiting. Thorn stood beneath the only shaft of dawn brave enough to pierce the canopy, tall and broad and carved from every nightmare the pack ever whispered around dying fires. The scars across his bare chest caught the pale light like rivers of silver. When his eyes found mine, molten gold, ancient and merciless, the runes on the walls dimmed, bowing to a power older than they were. I stopped 3 paces away, close enough to feel heat rolling off him in waves, close enough for his scent to flood me. Winter pine, hot iron, and something darker that slid down my spine and pooled low, unwelcome and undeniable. He circled me once, slowly, boots silent on the packed earth, each step measured, deliberate, a predator deciding where to bite first. His breath grazed the shell of my ear. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said, voice low enough to bruise. Again. I didn't flinch. The pups were starving. I fed them. You stole from the council's share. I took what would have rotted while old men argued over borders. My words came out steady, sharper than my pulse. Call it theft if it helps you sleep, Alpha. Just don't pretend it wasn't mercy. He stopped in front of me, so close I had to tilt my head to hold his stare. The air between us crackled, thick with fog and something far more dangerous. "Look at me," he murmured, lethal silk, "and tell me you feel no fear." I let the silence stretch until the runes flickered like dying stars. "I feel fear," I whispered, soft enough that only he could taste it. "But none of it is for you." Something raw flashed across his face, too fast to name, too real to ignore. His hand lifted, slow as a threat, knuckles brushing the line of my jaw. The contact was barely there, yet it lit me up like wildfire under skin. My voice dropped to a breath, meant for him alone. "Weakness is the chain you forge for me, Alpha, but chains can be turned into weapons." His fingers stilled. For one impossible heartbeat, the Alpha wasn't an alpha at all. He was a man staring at a storm he hadn't seen coming. Then the horn sounded again outside. Deeper, urgent, shattering the moment like glass. His hand fell away as if my skin had burned him. "This isn't finished," he growled, voice rough enough to scrape bone. "No," I said, already turning toward the light, heart hammering so hard I felt it in my teeth. It's only just begun. I walked out into the thickening fog, with the ghost of his touch branded on my jaw, and the unshakable certainty that I had just struck the first spark of a fire that would either free us both or burn the entire wilds to ash. And I wasn't sure which outcome I wanted more. Chapter 2. The Omega Who Refused to Kneel. I woke to rain on my face and his words still burning in my ears. You disobeyed me. Again. As if the word again could shame me into silence. The storm had rolled in overnight, turning the wilds into a gray, dripping wound. Water slid off the reed roof in silver sheets, drumming against my skin while I lay there, staring at the dark. My jaw still carried the memory of his knuckles. Barely a touch, yet it had branded me deeper than any rune ever carved. I rose before the horn could call a second time, pulled on the same cloak, now soaked through, and slipped out into the downpour. No one saw me leave. The forbidden glades lay beyond the eastern boundary, where the runes grew faint and the council's eyes grew blind. That was where the overlooked gathered. The old, the injured. The Omegas, who had learned to move like shadows. I carried a woven basket against my chest. Roots, fever bark, moon mint. Things the healers hoarded while pups starved. I was kneeling in the mud, fingers black with earth, when the air changed. He was already there. I didn't hear him approach. One moment there was only rain and sorrow. The next, Thorn stood at the edge of the clearing, water streaming off his bare shoulders, eyes cutting through the storm like twin blades of gold. My heart slammed against my ribs, but I didn't stand. Not yet. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate, until the rain had to choose whose skin it touched first. His scent hit me harder than the cold. Pine crushed under iron, storm, and smoke, and something that made my knees want to betray me. You shouldn't be here, he said, voice low enough that the rain almost swallowed it. Neither should you, I answered, rising at last. Mud clung to my calves. Yet here we are. His gaze flicked to the basket, then to the trembling Omega boy I'd been tending, barely 13, ribs showing, fever burning. Something tightened in Thorn's jaw. You risk exile for this, he said. I risk exile for breathing, I replied. At least this way my breath means something. Thunder rolled overhead. The boy whimpered. I moved without thinking, placing myself between them. Thorn's eyes narrowed. Step aside, Ilara. No. The single word hung between us, fragile as frost, sharp as claws. He stared at me like he'd never heard it before, like no one had ever said it to his face and lived. Rain slid down his throat, traced the scars across his collarbone. I watched it happen and hated how my mouth went dry. You make this harder than it needs to be, he said at last, quieter now, almost lost beneath the storm. I took one step closer, close enough that the heat of him cut through the chill. Your isolation isn't strength, Alpha, I whispered. It's a prison you built yourself. His breath caught, just for a heartbeat, but I heard it. I felt it. Lightning cracked the sky open, bleaching the world white. In that flash, I saw him clearly. The flicker of doubt in those gold eyes. The way his fists clenched, like he wanted to reach for something he'd sworn never to touch again. Then the darkness rushed back in, and he was the Alpha once more. This mercy of yours will destroy you, he warned, voice rough. Only if I let it, I said. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Rain poured between us, around us, through us. The space where our breaths mingled felt sacred and forbidden all at once. He turned first. I watched him melt back into the trees, shoulders rigid, every step fighting something I couldn't name. The storm kept falling, but when I knelt again to finish binding the boy's wounds, my hands didn't shake anymore. And somewhere deep in the wilds, I swear I felt the first crack in a wall that had stood for centuries. Chapter 3. Echoes in the Hollow. Thunder rumbled the moment Thorn's voice cut across the gathering clearing, and every wolf in the whispering wilds felt it in their bones. I stood at the very back, half hidden beneath dripping pines, hood pulled low so only my eyes showed. Rain lashed sideways, stinging my cheeks, soaking the cloak until it clung like a second heavier pelt. Around me, the pack pressed shoulder to shoulder, betas, deltas, a handful of lesser alphas, all of them staring up at the stone ledge where he stood alone. Thorn. Lightning forked behind him, bleaching the scars on his chest silver white for one blinding heartbeat. His voice carried over the storm without effort, deep enough to vibrate in my ribs. Rogue tracks on the northern border. We ride at dusk. No excuses. No exceptions. His gaze swept the crowd the way a blade sweeps flesh, slow, deliberate, hunting weakness. And then it found me. Even through the curtain of rain, even across 50 muddy paces, those gold eyes locked on mine and held. A silent command that scraped down my spine. You will be there. My stomach flipped, heat and ice colliding, but I refused to look away. Not this time. The gathering dissolved into restless motion. Wolves peeled off toward their dens, shoulders hunched against the downpour. I turned to melt back into the trees, because Omegas were never chosen for border patrols, never trusted with anything sharper than a kitchen knife. But a hand closed around my wrist before I'd taken 2 steps. Steel fingers, warm skin, rain sliding between our palms like a secret. "Where do you think you're going?" Thorn's voice was low, meant for me alone, yet it drowned out the entire storm. I twisted, met his stare up close. Water streamed off his lashes, clung to the hard line of his mouth. Up this close, I could see the faint tremor in his jaw, rage, or something far more dangerous. "Somewhere I won't slow you down," I said. His grip tightened, thumb pressing over my pulse. "You'll ride with me." A hush rippled outward, wolves pretending not to listen while their ears strained. Someone gasped. Someone else growled. I laughed, soft, incredulous, edged with the wildness the rain had woken in me. "You're joking." "Do I look like I joke?" No. He looked like thunder given flesh and bone. He released my wrist only to catch my elbow, steering me through the crowd with a grip that felt less like guidance and more like ownership. Whispers trailed us like smoke. The hollow waited at the edge of the clearing, an ancient bowl of stone where the world tree's roots had once cracked the earth wide open. Rain poured off the lip above, turning the ground into a shallow, rushing stream. No one followed us here. He released me the moment we were alone. I rounded on him, water flying from my braid. "You can't force me onto a patrol. The runes don't apply when I say they don't." His voice cracked like the thunder overhead. "You want to prove you're more than the council's leftover scraps? Then stop hiding behind laws written to keep you small." I stepped closer, close enough that rain blurred the edges of the world, until only he and I remained. "And you?" I asked, soft enough that he had to lean in to hear me. "What are you hiding behind, Thorn?" Lightning again. In its flash, I saw the raw truth flicker across his face. Grief, exhaustion, something that looked terrifyingly like fear. He closed the distance until his chest brushed mine with every breath. Rain slid from his hair to my collarbones, warm where it mixed with his skin. "They see the alpha," he said, voice ragged, barely above the storm. "You see the man drowning beneath it." The confession hung between us, fragile as frost. My hand moved before I could stop it, palm pressing flat over his heart, feeling the wild, frantic beat beneath muscle and scar. His breath stuttered against my lips. Another crack of thunder, closer now, and the sky split open. That was when the rogue howled. The sound ripped through the hollow like a blade, feral and wrong, too close. Thorn's entire body went predator still, shielding me without thought. His arm locked around my waist, dragging me behind the shelter of his frame as 3 shadows burst from the tree line. Rogues, lean and starving, eyes glowing with moon madness. I had one heartbeat to feel terror. Then Thorn moved. He was a blur of claws and fury, meeting the first rogue mid-air. Blood scented the rain, hot, copper-bright. The second lunged for his blind side. I didn't think. I seized the fallen branch at my feet, heavy with rot and stormwater, and swung with every ounce of rage and fear and defiance I had kept chained inside me for years. Wood met skull with a sickening crack. The rogue dropped, whimpering. Silence, except for rain and panting. Thorn dispatched the third with a twist of merciless efficiency. Then he was in front of me again, hands gripping my shoulders hard enough to bruise, eyes wild and searching. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, voice hoarse, almost broken. I shook my head, branch still clutched like a staff, knuckles white. His gaze dropped to my trembling fingers, then lifted to my face. Something shattered behind his eyes, something proud and ancient and terrified all at once. He pulled me against him without warning, one hand cradling the back of my head, the other splayed across my spine. Rain hammered down on us both, but his body was a furnace, burning away the cold. My palms flattened against his chest, feeling the thunder of his heart match mine, beat for frantic beat. We stayed like that, two wolves soaked in blood and rain, and something neither of us had words for, until the storm itself seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, deliberately, his fingers threaded through mine, our hands clasped, slick with mud and rainwater, and the first fragile thread of trust. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The hollow echoed with everything we hadn't said, everything we suddenly couldn't deny. And somewhere inside my chest, the last of my fear turned into something fierce and bright and unstoppable, something that tasted like power, like freedom, like him. Chapter 4. Fractured Loyalties. Dawn broke, bruised and bleeding over the wilds, the color of old wine spilled across the sky. I hadn't slept. My body still hummed with the memory of Thorn's chest under my palms, his heart hammering against my skin like it wanted out of its cage. I could still feel the exact moment our fingers had laced together in the rain, the way the storm had quieted just long enough for something unspoken to pass between us. Then the whispers started. They slithered through the camp before the sun even cleared the treetops, sharp, venomous, aimed straight at me. Someone saw her in the hollow with him. Hands clasped like lovers. Disgusting. She thinks mercy makes her special. It makes her a traitor. I was grinding fever bark for a shivering Omega girl when the council runner found me. A beta boy, barely 16, eyes wide with fear and excitement. The council summons you, now. I wiped my hands on my skirt, heart already sinking. I knew what this was. The girl clutched my wrist with bird-thin fingers. "Don't go," she breathed. "They'll hurt you." I bent, pressed my forehead to hers. "Then remember this. Hurt doesn't mean broken." I walked the path to the circle alone again. Same thorns, same sneers. Only this time, the whispers were louder, uglier. The circle was a ring of standing stones older than the world tree, blackened by centuries of blood and judgment. The council sat in their carved seats, 7 ancient wolves draped in silver fur, and at the center stood Thorn. He didn't look at me when I entered. The head counselor, an old she-wolf named Vera, with eyes like spoiled milk, rose. "Elara of no line," she began, voice dripping acid. "You are accused of hoarding resources, defying direct orders, and now, worst of all, seducing the Alpha into negligence." A ripple of shock and disgust rolled through the onlookers. I laughed, couldn't help it. The sound cracked across the stones like a whip. "Seducing?" I repeated. "Is that what you call it when a man chooses to see me as something other than dirt beneath his claws?" Vera's lip curled. "Silence. Your tongue has already cost this pack too much." Thorn finally moved. One step forward. His voice cut the air like a blade. "Enough." The circle went still. Even Vera sat. He still didn't look at me, but I felt his attention like teeth on my throat. "Speak your accusation plainly," he said to the council, tone flat and deadly. Vera lifted a claw. She aids the weak at the expense of the strong. She weakens you. And last night, witnesses saw you shield her from rogues you should have let die. A roar of approval from the older wolves. My blood turned to ice, then to fire. I stepped forward before Thorn could answer. So that's the crime? I asked, voice ringing clear. That I refuse to let children starve while we hoard meat for ceremonies no one believes in anymore? That I dare to stand beside an alpha instead of behind him? I turned slowly, meeting every pair of eyes in the circle. You want me silent and starving. You want me grateful for scraps. But I am done being grateful for cages. Vera rose again, trembling with rage. You forget your place. No, I cut in, soft, lethal. You forgot mine never existed. Silence. Thick, stunned, electric. Then Thorn spoke. So low, only those closest heard. Why do you make me question everything I've built? The question wasn't for the council. It was for me. Our eyes finally met. In that single look, I saw the fracture spreading through him. Wide, unstoppable, beautiful. Vera snarled. Alpha, discipline her or we will. Thorn's gaze never left mine. Let them try, he said. The words fell like an axe. Gasps, growls, chaos threatening to erupt. I felt the shift inside me then, clear, bright, terrifying. I was no longer asking permission to exist. I was demanding the world rearrange itself around the space I now claimed. Thorn took one step toward me, then another, until he stood close enough that the council had to crane their necks to see. His hand lifted, slow, deliberate, and settled against the side of my throat. Not a grip. A brand. His thumb brushed the pulse hammering beneath my skin. His eyes burned into mine, voice a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the circle. You mistake my compassion for weakness, I said, loud enough for them all. That's why you'll lose. His fingers flexed once, possessive, reverent, undone. Then he dropped his hand and turned to the council, shoulders squared, voice forged from iron and storm. This hearing is over. He didn't wait for permission. He simply took my wrist and pulled me from the circle, past gaping wolves and shattered tradition, into the shadowed trees where no runes could bind us. Behind us, the fracture spread wider, and I knew, without a shred of doubt, that the next time I walked into that circle, it would be as something none of them had ever imagined. Not an Omega, not a traitor, but the one who would bring them all to their knees. Chapter 5. Veiled Cravings. The word exile tasted like smoke on my tongue before I ever heard it spoken. I was crouched in the hollow root of an ancient oak, close enough to the council chambers to catch every word, far enough that the shadows kept me hidden. The stone walls carried sound the way bones carry blood, clear, intimate, impossible to ignore. Vera's voice rose first, sharp as broken glass. The Omega has poisoned the Alpha's judgment. She must be removed before the next moon. A murmur of agreement. Then a deeper voice, Elder Corvin, old enough to remember when the runes were first carved. Death is cleaner, but exile will break her spirit, and his. Thorn's reply came low, controlled, lethal. Touch her, and every throat in this room will be torn out before sunrise. Silence, thick, suffocating. My heart hammered so hard I was sure they'd hear it through the walls. I slipped away before the argument could restart, bare feet silent on the wet moss, breath fogging in the pre-dawn chill. The wilds were still asleep, but I wasn't. I hadn't been since the hollow, since his hand on my throat in front of the entire council, since the moment I realized the ground beneath us had shifted forever. I needed allies, real ones, not whispers in the dark. The forgotten gathered at the old birthing cave, Omegas too broken for mating, elders too weak for hunts, young ones scarred by rituals that should never have existed. They looked up when I stepped inside, eyes wary, bodies shrinking from habit. I didn't waste breath on pretty words. They're coming for me, I said, and when they finish with me, they'll come for every one of you. A hush. Then, a girl with burn scars across her arms stood. "What do you need?" I told them. By the time the moon crested the treetops, half the forgotten had pledged themselves to me. Quietly, carefully, with the kind of loyalty born from shared wounds. I was slipping through the pine needles toward the northern ridge when the air changed. He was hunting me. I felt him before I heard him. The shift in pressure, the way the night itself leaned toward his footsteps. I could have run. I didn't. I turned. Thorn stepped from the shadows like he'd been carved from them, moonlight slicing across the hard plains of his face. Rain had started again, soft this time, more mist than storm. It beaded on his lashes, slid down the column of his throat. I hated how beautiful he looked when he was furious. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, voice rough. "Neither should you," I answered. He closed the distance in 3 strides, stopped just short of touching me. "Running from me won't change what's between us." I laughed, low, shaky. "I'm not running from you, Thorn. I'm running toward something you're too afraid to see." His eyes flashed. "And what is that?" "A pack that survives because it protects its weakest, not because it devours them." He flinched. Actually flinched. The space between us shrank to nothing. I could feel the heat pouring off him, could smell pine and rain, and the faint copper trace of blood from the cut on his knuckles. His hand lifted, hovered beside my face, trembling with restraint. I stepped into it. His palm settled against my jaw like it had been carved to fit there. Thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone, slow, reverent, dangerous. "I spent years believing mercy was weakness," he said, voice barely above the rain. "Then you bled for a rogue you didn't know, and smiled while you did it." My breath caught. His forehead dropped to mine. The world narrowed to the place where our skin met, to the shared breath that tasted like confession. "Your strength isn't in commands, Alpha," I whispered against his lips. "It's in the hearts you fail to claim." His grip tightened, just enough to remind me how easily he could break me, and how much he never would. The rain thickened, sliding between us, over us, through us. We stayed like that, 2 wolves caught in the same storm, neither willing to move first, neither able to move away. His fingers brushed mine, once barely there, then curled back into a fist at his side. I felt the rupture coming the way animals feel earthquakes, but not tonight. Tonight there was only the rain and the heat of his hand on my face, and the terrible, exquisite knowledge that everything we were had just become inevitable. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Chapter 6. Shadows of Surrender. I woke to the sound of my own heartbeat and the shadow of him filling my doorway. Dawn hadn't yet reached the wilds, so the world was still bruised violet and silver. Thorn stood on the threshold of my tiny hut, shoulders almost touching both sides of the frame, rain dripping from his hair onto the packed earth floor. He hadn't knocked. He never did anymore. His eyes found mine across the dimness, and the air inside the hut changed, became too small, too hot, too honest. "Why won't you submit?" he asked, voice raw from a night of no sleep. I sat up slowly, letting the woven blanket fall to my waist. The runes on my collarbones glowed faintly, reacting to his nearness the way iron reacts to a storm. "Because submission was never the price of my safety," I said. "You just wanted it to be." He stepped inside and closed the door with his heel. The click of the latch sounded louder than thunder. Today was the ritual of alignment, an ancient ceremony the council had dragged out of the archives like a rusted blade. Every unmated Omega of age had to stand before the pack and accept or reject a claiming bite. Refusal meant exile. Acceptance meant ownership. They had scheduled me first. Thorn knew it. I knew it. The entire wilds knew it. He crossed the small space until his boots touched my bare feet, until I had to tilt my head back to hold his stare. "I can stop this," he said quietly. "One word from me, and the ritual ends." I rose to my knees on the pallet so we were almost eye level. "And tomorrow they'll find another way to break me. You know that." His jaw flexed. Then let me claim you." The words hung between us. Simple, brutal, impossible. I reached up and pressed my palm over the scar that cut across his left pectoral, the one shaped like a crescent moon. His heart slammed against my hand. "You don't want a mate, Thorn," I whispered. "You want absolution." His breath fractured. I saw the moment the wall inside him cracked wide open. "I had a sister," he said, voice shredded. "Younger, Omega. Too soft for this world. When the border wars came, I was away, leading a raid I thought would protect us. Rogues breached the heart of the wilds while I was gone. They tore her apart in front of the pups she was hiding. His eyes were glassy, but no tears fell. There hadn't been tears for years. I came home to blood on the nursery floor, and her body already cold. I swore I would never be weak again. That mercy was the blade that killed her." His hand came up to cover mine, pressing it harder against his scar. "So I became the blade instead." The confession tore something open inside my chest, something tender and furious and aching. I slid my fingers up to cradle his face. "You're not protecting them from weakness, Thorn. You're protecting yourself from grief." He made a sound, half growl, half sob, and then his forehead dropped to mine. We breathed the same air, tasted the same salt of unshed tears. Outside, the ritual horn sounded, long, mournful, final. His arms came around me without permission, crushing me against him like he could shield me from the entire world with his body alone. I felt the tremor running through him, the war between duty and want. "I won't let them take you," he rasped against my temple. "Then stop trying to own me," I said into the hollow of his throat. "Start standing beside me." Silence, thick, electric, sacred. His hand slid up my back, slow, reverent, learning the shape of a future neither of us had dared name. The horn sounded again, closer. He pulled back just enough to look at me. Really look. No alpha, no mask, just a man stripped raw. "If you walk out there and refuse every claim," he said, voice steady now, "I will be the first to kneel." My heart stopped, then started again twice as strong. I brushed my thumb across his lower lip. "Then let's give them something new to fear." He closed his eyes, leaned into the touch, like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Outside, the wilds waited to see which of us would break first. Neither of us did. Instead, we broke everything else. Chapter 7. The Unraveling Bond. The horn that called the pack to the circle at dusk was different this time. Lower, slower, the sound of a world ending. I walked the path with my head high and my hands unbound. No guards, no chains. Just the weight of every eye in the whispering wilds, pressing against my skin like burning brands. They had cleared the center of the circle for the claiming ritual. Torches ringed the stones, flames whipping in the wind. The council sat in their high seats, silver fur gleaming like judgment. And at the very front, on the lowest step of the Alpha's dais, stood Thorn. He hadn't looked at me once since sunrise. The head counselor, Vera, rose with a smile sharp enough to cut moonlight. "Ilara of no line," she intoned. "Step forward and receive the bite that will bind you to the pack's protection." A dozen males moved into the circle, high-ranking betas and 2 lesser alphas, all of them chosen for strength, for cruelty, for obedience. Their eyes raked over me like I was meat. I stepped forward. The wind died. Even the torches seemed to lean in. Vera lifted the ceremonial dagger, the one that would mark the chosen male before the bite. "Which of these worthy wolves will you accept?" she asked. I looked at each of them, slowly, deliberately, letting them feel the weight of my refusal before I spoke it. "None." The word cracked across the stones like a whip. Gasps, growls. Vera's face twisted. "You dare invoke the old law?" she snarled. "Mutual consent or exile?" "I dare," I said, voice clear, steady, unstoppable. "And I choose exile before I choose slavery." Chaos erupted. Shouts, snarls, wolves surging to their feet. Then Thorn moved. He stepped down from the dais, one step, two, until he stood between me and every wolf in the circle. His back to me, his body a wall. "Silence," he commanded, and the circle obeyed instantly. He turned to face me, slowly, deliberately, and in front of the entire pack, in front of the council that had crowned him, in front of the moon itself, Thorn dropped to one knee. The sound that tore through the circle was half shock, half worship. His eyes never left mine. "I will not claim you," he said, voice carrying to the farthest shadow. "I will not bind you. I will not own you." He bowed his head. "I offer myself instead, freely, without demand. Take me if you choose me, Alara. Or walk away and I will still tear down these stones with my bare hands before I let them touch you." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat. I stepped forward until my shadow fell across him. Then I knelt too, not in submission, but in answer. I took his face in my hands and felt the tremor running through him. "If you take me, Alpha," I said, loud enough for every wolf to hear, "it will be because I gave myself, not because you demanded it." His breath shook against my palms. "I choose this," I whispered, for him alone. "I choose you." The storm broke then, not outside, but inside the circle. A roar of approval from the forgotten in the back, a snarl of rage from the council, the sound of everything old cracking open. Thorn rose, pulling me with him. His arms came around me like steel and sanctuary. The pack surged forward, some to protest, some to protect, but the rain started falling hard, sudden, blinding. He bent his head, lips brushing my ear. "Run with me," we ran. Into the trees, into the storm, into the cave that had sheltered wolves since the first moon. Water poured off the entrance like a curtain, sealing us inside with nothing but torchlight and breath and the wild, impossible truth of what we had just done. He pressed me against the cool stone wall, hands on either side of my head, caging me without trapping me. "Tell me to stop," he rasped, voice shredded. "Tell me and I will." I reached up, traced the hard line of his jaw, felt the shudder that ran through him at the touch. "I choose this," I said again. "I choose us." His mouth crashed into mine. Not a claim, a surrender. Rain drummed on stone, thunder rolled overhead, and every rule the wilds had ever carved into our bones shattered between us. There was no bite, no binding, only the slow, reverent press of his hands, learning the shape of consent, the way my fingers tangled in his hair, like I'd always belonged there. The quiet, sacred sound of two wolves finally choosing each other instead of the chains. The storm raged outside. Inside the cave, something new was born, something fierce and free and ours. And when the rain finally quieted, when our breaths slowed and our hearts found the same rhythm, he pressed his forehead to mine and whispered the only vow that mattered. "Yours," he said, "always yours." I smiled against his lips. "Then lead with me, Alpha. Not over me." The moon rose full and bright above the wilds that night, and for the first time in centuries, it witnessed an Alpha kneel and an Omega rise. Chapter 8. Fractured Dawn. I woke to the scrape of claws on wood and the smell of betrayal. The door to my hut hung open, torn from its leather hinges. 3 council guards filled the frame, silver torques gleaming at their throats, Vera's personal enforcers. Rain still fell in thin, cold needles, but the storm inside me was worse. "By order of the Moon Council," the largest one growled, "you are stripped of pack protection. Exile begins now." I rose slowly, letting the blanket fall. My skin prickled where Thorn's hands had been hours ago, where his mouth had mapped every inch of my choice. I was still bare beneath the woven cloak, but I felt clothed in something fiercer than fur. "Where is he?" I asked. The guard's lip curled. "The Alpha has been summoned to answer for last night. He is detained." My blood turned to ice. I stepped forward. "Take me to him." The guard laughed, reached for my arm. I moved first. I had spent years learning how to be small. Turns out small things know exactly where the soft places are. My knee found his groin, my elbow found the throat of the second, and by the time the third lunged, I was already out the door, running barefoot through the mud, cloak flapping like broken wings. The wilds were chaos. Wolves fought in the paths, loyalists against traditionalists. Torches hissed in the rain, howls of rage and grief braided together. Someone had opened the border wards. Rogue scents poured in on the wind, thick with hunger. And at the heart of it, in the circle of judgment, Thorn knelt in chains, silver chains, forged to burn alpha blood. He was on his knees in the mud, head bowed, guards surrounding him. Vera stood above him on the dais, voice rising over the storm. For the crime of weakening the pack, for forsaking duty to an Omega whore. I didn't hear the rest. I walked straight through the crowd. Wolves parted without thinking, some out of shock, some out of reverence. My bare feet left bloody prints where broken stone cut me, but I felt none of it. Vera saw me coming. Her eyes widened, then narrowed to slits. "Seize her!" No one moved. I stopped in front of Thorn. His head lifted. The chains had burned black streaks across his wrists, his throat. Blood ran from a split in his brow. When he saw me, something shattered in his eyes. Relief, terror, pride. "Ilara," he rasped, voice raw from silver poisoning. "Go!" I knelt in the mud, so we were eye to eye. "No," I said softly. Then I turned to the pack. Every wolf I had ever fed, every Omega I had ever bandaged, every elder I had ever carried when their legs failed, they were all here now, pressed to the front, eyes bright with something the council had never given them. Hope. I stood. "This is what they're afraid of," I called, voice carrying over the rain. "Not me! Not him! Us! Together!" Vera shrieked, "She lies! She corrupts!" I cut her off with a look. "You want to exile me?" I said. "Fine. But you'll have to exile every wolf I've kept alive while you hoarded meat and medicine. You'll have to exile every pup who remembers my hands instead of your claws." Silence fell, broken only by rain. I stepped closer to Thorn. Knelt again. My fingers found the lock on his chains, simple iron beneath the silver veneer, because even Vera hadn't believed he would ever kneel. I met his eyes. "I'm not leaving you," I whispered. His lips shaped my name like a prayer. The lock snapped under my fingers, old metal, rusted by years of blood and fear. The chains fell. Thorn rose slowly, silver burns smoking on his skin, and the sound that left his throat was not human. It was the sound of an alpha remembering who he was always meant to be. He turned to the council, to Vera, and for the first time in 100 years, the circle trembled. I stood at his side, not behind him, not beneath him. Side by side. The fracture was complete, and the dawn that broke over the wilds that morning was the color of fresh blood and new beginnings. Chapter 9. The leader they needed. The rival pack came at dawn, not in trickles of rogues, but as a black tide of muscle and hunger, spilling over the northern ridge like ink poured across parchment. Their alpha, Kale, had waited years for this moment, for the whispering wilds to tear itself apart from the inside. He scented weakness the way vultures scent death. He was not wrong, but he was too late. I stood on the shattered wall of the old watchtower, wind whipping my hair across my face, blood still crusted on my bare feet from the night before. Below me, the pack was scattered, some still snarling at one another, some bleeding from council claws, some simply frozen, waiting for someone to tell them what came next. I didn't wait. I drew breath and let my voice cut through the chaos. "You fight for fear," I shouted down to Kale's advancing line. "They'll fight for me." Then I turned my back on the enemy, on purpose, on principle, and looked only at my wolves. The forgotten, the scarred, the ones who had never been asked to fight because they were never expected to win. I opened my arms. "This is not about teeth," I said, soft enough that they had to lean in to hear me. "This is about heart, and ours beats louder than theirs ever will. Something shifted. I felt it the way you feel the first crack of spring ice on a river. The burned girl from the birthing cave stepped forward first, clutching a spear made from a broken table leg. Then the elder with the limp. Then the pups I once fed stolen meat. One by one they moved, not in perfect lines, not with perfect weapons, but with perfect certainty. And they formed up behind me. Not behind Thorn, behind me. I glanced at him where he stood to my left, silver burns still raw on his skin, eyes blazing with something that looked a lot like awe. He said nothing. He simply dropped to one knee in the mud, head bowed, and the entire ridge saw it. The Alpha knelt to an Omega. Kale laughed across the valley, rich, mocking, certain of victory. He stopped laughing 30 heartbeats later. Because we did not meet them with brute force. We met them with everything they had taught us to hide. The scarred ones knew every bolt hole, every blind corner. The elders knew the songs that once calmed the world tree's roots into shifting, roots that now rose like living walls. The pups knew how to move unseen because they had spent their lives being unseen. And I knew how to make them believe they were unstoppable, because they were. Kale's front line shattered against a tide they could not predict. Children darting between legs with slings, elders collapsing tunnels, the burned girl setting fire to the grass with a torch and a scream of pure triumph. Thorn fought beside me the entire time, never in front, never giving orders, only guarding my blind side, trusting my voice to lead where his strength once ruled. At the height of it, when Kale himself charged, massive, black-furred, death in his eyes, Thorn stepped forward to meet him. I stepped forward too. Kale faltered for one fatal heartbeat, confused by the sight of an Alpha and an Omega moving as one. That heartbeat was all we needed. Thorn took the brute force. I took the opening. I slipped beneath Kale's guard, pressed the broken spear to the soft place under his jaw, and whispered, "Power is not in the size of the teeth, but in the loyalty of the heart." He dropped. Not dead. Never dead. Just defeated. The rival pack broke and ran. And when the dust settled and the sun finally burned through the clouds, the whispering wilds went still. Every wolf, mine, theirs, the ones who had stood with the council and the ones who had stood with nothing at all, turned to look at me. I was covered in blood and ash and someone else's tears. I was shaking. I was smiling. Thorn rose from where he had pinned Kale, walked to me through the silence, and did the only thing left to do. He bowed, deep, formal, ancient. Then he took my hand, turned us both to face the pack, and raised our joined fists to the sky. The roar that answered was not for him. It was for me, for us, for the world we had just carved out of the ashes of the old one. And in that moment, I finally understood. I had never needed to become the Alpha. I had only needed them to see that I already was. Chapter 10. The Rising Moon. The full moon hung low and swollen, so bright it turned the entire circle silver. Every wolf in the whispering wilds was there. Not summoned, not commanded, simply drawn. They filled the ancient stones until there was no space left for shadows. No council thrones remained. The carved seats had been torn down and burned days ago. In their place stood a single ring of torches, and at its heart, a circle of bare earth still scarred from blood and fire. I walked the path alone this time, not because no one would walk with me, but because this was mine to claim. My feet were bare, my hair loose. I wore the deep indigo cloak of the old leaders, the one no one had dared touch for 3 centuries. Its hem brushing the ground like a whisper of all the wolves who had come before and never been enough. Thorn waited in the center. He wore black, no silver, no torque, no mark of rank except the burns on his wrists that had already begun to fade. When he saw me, his shoulders lifted with a breath that looked like relief and prayer combined. The pack fell silent the moment I stepped into the torchlight. I stopped 1 pace from him. For a heartbeat, we simply looked, really looked. No titles, no chains. Just Ilara and Thorn, the two wolves who had broken the world and built something better from the pieces. I spoke first, voice soft but carrying to the farthest edge. "I will not take your title," I said to him, to them, to the moon itself. "We will not rule as one above the rest. Tonight we end the age of singular crowns." A murmur rippled outward, shock, wonder, hunger. I turned to the pack. From this night forward, the Whispering Wilds will be led by consent, not command. By counsel chosen by every voice, Omega, Beta, Alpha, Elder, Pup. Strength will no longer be measured by how many kneel, but by how many stand beside us. I extended my hand, palm up. Thorn placed his in mine without hesitation. Together we faced the moon. He spoke then, voice rough with everything we had survived. "I don't take a mate," he said, eyes locked on mine. "I choose a partner. I don't claim a possession. I serve a vision greater than my own." His fingers tightened around mine. "I serve her, and through her, all of you." The wind stilled. I felt the moment the pack understood, felt it in the sudden hush, in the way heads bowed not from fear, but from reverence. Thorn lifted our joined hands high. The roar that followed was not obedience, it was recognition. Torches flared brighter. The scent of pine and moonmint and warm fur rose like incense. Somewhere a pup began the old bonding song, the one that had been forbidden for generations, and within heartbeats, the entire circle sang it back. We did not bite. We did not need to. Instead, Thorn drew me close, slow enough that every wolf could see it was my choice, my movement, my yes. His palm settled over my heart. Mine settled over his. Two heartbeats became one. The moon crested the ridge, bathing us in liquid silver. He leaned in until his lips brushed my ear, words meant for me alone. "You were never weak," he whispered. I was just too blind to see strength in a different form. I smiled against his jaw. "Then open your eyes, love," I whispered back. "And never close them again." The pack howled, not the mournful cry of submission, but the wild, fierce song of a people reborn. And under that moon, in that circle, beside the wolf who had knelt so I could rise, I finally claimed the only title I had ever wanted. Not Alpha, not Omega, just Ilara, the one who led with her heart wide open and taught an entire wilds how to do the same. We stood there until the torches burned low and the moon began its descent, hands entwined, hearts bound by choice instead of chains. And for the first time in my life, the runes on my skin did not burn. They glowed, soft, steady, free.